Guys, welcome to JPT. I'm Carson G, and this is Just Plain Tech. Okay, in today's video, we are going to be going over the right Linux distribution for you. So, maybe you just got your brand new Windows PC 2 months ago, and it is already broken, and you're thinking,
I didn't pay for this.
Alright, to get started off, there are tons of Linux distributions out there, hundreds if not thousands. So, how do you choose the right one? Well, so there's stable releases of Linux, and then there's rolling release. Stable release is based on the long-term support Linux kernel, or LTS, which comes out every 2 years, and it is supported for 5 years. But, there's a new version of the regular rolling Linux kernel, which every 6 months. So it comes out every 6 months. So say a rolling release distribution would have a new version with every single new kernel every 6 months. But let's say a stable release or a long-term support Linux distribution will have long-term support releases based on the long-term support kernel. And there are some distributions that go in between that also have long-term support and rolling release versions. Say, for like Ubuntu and Linux Mint, for example. You've probably heard of Ubuntu out there if you've been looking into Linux. And, I don't know, so Ubuntu 14.04 long-term support is based off the long-term support Linux kernel that comes out at the time. And then there are a few releases, Ubuntu 16.04 LTS, another long-term support with the long-term support kernel, a few other ones based on the rolling kernel, Ubuntu 18.04 LTS, I think you get where I'm going. So there are some Linux distributions like that have rolling releases and long-term support. Another one you might want to take into account, for example, is OpenSUSE. So when you go to the OpenSUSE download page, you'll notice that they have downloads for OpenSUSE Leap and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. Now, OpenSUSE Leap is like the rolling release. It keeps going every 6 months. Mix up! Okay. OpenSUSE Leap is based off the long-term support kernel. Every 2 years it leaps to the new long-term support kernel. But OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is the rolling release. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, it has a new release every 6 months. So, based off the 6-month kernel schedule thing. So, yeah, so one of the popular Linux distributions known as Debian is it's the base of Ubuntu. So, Debian is a long-term support release. It has only long-term support releases based off the long-term support Linux kernel. And let's say Ubuntu and Linux Mint are some of those ones, are just two of those ones that are in between that have long-term support and rolling releases. Now, Debian, Ubuntu, and Linux Mint and all their derivatives use the apt package manager, APT. 3 letters, APT, Advanced Package Tools, which is probably the most used package manager out there. So you're going to be able to find most stuff using the apt package manager. So you'll probably be able to find more apps available on a Debian, Ubuntu, or Linux Mint based distribution. Alright, so some more popular ones out there. Fedora is a good one. It is the base for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So yeah, and then so if you want to get Red Hat, you need to have a Red Hat membership, and that's kind of a pain to sign up for. So if you don't want to sign up for that, then you can get Fedora, which is Red Hat's base, or CentOS, which is based off Red Hat that is maintained by the community. It's spelled CentOS, even though that's not how it's spelled. It's CentOS, people. CentOS. And it stands for Community Enterprise Operating System. So you could consider that one of your options. Now, CentOS, Red Hat, and Fedora all use the Yum package manager, which is probably the second most popular package manager out there that most Linux distributions use. It just like apt, how you can type in sudo apt-get install whatever. Just like Yum, you can type in sudo yum install whatever. So it's kind of the same principalities and the same thing. It's just with Yum you have to install the repositories. So like say apt. Say you have apt on Ubuntu. Ubuntu comes with apt, and it already has the Ubuntu repositories in there. Or same with Linux Mint and Debian. But CentOS, Red Hat, or Fedora, it comes with like one main repository that doesn't have much options. So you will have to use that one repository to manually install other repositories to get more availability for more apps. So, and you also have to install multimedia support, at least on CentOS, I know that for sure. So, I actually don't use Red Hat or Fedora. I just use CentOS. So, you will have to install multimedia support. I'm guessing you'll have to do the same thing on Red Hat and Fedora. So, there's a little bit of configuring you got to do with CentOS, Red Hat, and Fedora, other base distros. If you don't want to do that, Ubuntu, Debian, or Mint might be a better option for you. Alright, now let's go to the longest living Linux distribution. Take a guess. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, the longest living Linux distribution is Slackware. So those of you who guessed that, nice job. It is the longest living, not the oldest that's still maintained. Alright, so Slackware uses package tools which comes, it's like, since longest living Linux distribution, kind of based off how you have to do it back then, so you have to compile the sources and everything, and that is kind of annoying for some users. And I will probably do a future video on how to install software stores on Slackware, because, so check out this link right up here to install Debian, Ubuntu, or Mint, or other base distros. Alright, now, check out this one to install CentOS and those base distros, and check out this one to install Slackware. Alright, so, or I guess Vector Linux too, you can click that link up there. So, Vector Linux is based off Slackware. The latest version as of the time this video is released is, Vector Linux 7.1, which is based off Slackware 14.1, even though there is a Slackware 14.2 right now. So, it looks like they're a little behind on that. So, I recommend getting 4.2 for Slackware. It comes with KDE and XFCE, while Vector Linux only comes with XFCE. So, you kind of got a choice on Slackware between XFCE and KDE. So, yeah, it's a good thing to have. And let's see what else. So, Slackware and Vector Linux and other of those base distros use the package tools package manager. Like I said, you have to compile the sources and everything. But there's a easy way to install two software stores called gslapt or SBO UI or SBO package. SBO package is a command line software store, where SBO UI is a user interface for SBO package, so it's a GUI SBO package pretty much, and it also installs the dependencies for you, so that is nice. It might take a while to install since it has to grab all those dependencies, but other than that, it is good. You'll probably have more luck finding software on SBO package than you will on gslapt, or SBO UI than gslapt. Speaking of gslapt, you guys have probably heard of Slapped. So slapped is basically apt integrated into Slackware. Now, it doesn't have all the availability you would be able to get on apt. It's just, a package manager for Slackware programs that functions in a way that is similar to apt, and say gslapped is kind of similar to the Synaptic Package Manager, for those of you who are familiar with that. So, alright, so enough about distros. Now let's go over desktop environments. So, say you have an old, slow computer that's like 15 years old. You might want to get a distribution with the LXDE or XFCE desktop interface. Although I did notice that KDE also runs just as well as XFCE or LXDE will on Slackware. So, you have an old computer, Slackware is one of those good choices. Debian is too, and then Linux Mint. Ubuntu, not so much. Ubuntu uses some pretty heavy desktop environments like Unity and GNOME. So I recommend a 10-year-old computer at the oldest to run Ubuntu. You could get an Ubuntu derivative like Xubuntu. I think that's how it's pronounced. I can never remember. X Ubuntu for XFCE Ubuntu. You could get Lubuntu for LXDE Ubuntu. Kubuntu for KDE Ubuntu. I think you get the point. Ubuntu Mate for, you get the point. So you could get an Ubuntu derivative. Alright, so as far as light ones go, you could get something with Ice Window Manager, IceWM, which is probably lighter than LXDE. You can easily get that on something like TinyCore or Puppy Linux. LXDE and XFCE. And if you're using Slackware, KDE, but only if you're using Slackware. So, let's go over the heavy ones. So, GNOME 3, not GNOME 2, which is, so Mate is based off GNOME 2, which is a lightweight desktop environment. So, GNOME 2 is also a lightweight one, but, GNOME 3 is probably the heaviest one now. GNOME 3 is the heaviest Linux desktop environment. It will not run good on a PC that's 7+ years old. You might want to have something that's like 3 years old if you're going to, at least 3 years old at the most, if you're going to run a distro with GNOME. So maybe like one of the latest versions of Ubuntu or something. Now, Cinnamon is what Linux Mint uses. It's Linux Mint's efforts to have a nice, elegant, and effective desktop environment. So, Cinnamon is much, much lighter than GNOME. If you put it on like a 10 or 15-year-old PC, you will notice it will perform much better than GNOME, but it will still be kind of glitchy here and there. So, I'd probably recommend at 7-year-old at the most to run a distro with Cinnamon. Sorry, I kind of had a blank moment there. Let's see. So, but like if say you want Linux Mint, but Linux Mint Cinnamon doesn't run really well, you could get Linux Mint Mate or Linux Mint XFCE. Those run really well. Now KDE. KDE is kind of a little bit heavier than Cinnamon. If you get KDE on Debian or something like that, then it will be heavier, and you might want to have it on like a 3-year-old computer, maybe 5-year-old computer maximum. But I don't know how they do it on Slackware, but KDE on Slackware is, or CentOS 6 for that matter, KDE on Slackware or CentOS 6 is a lot lighter. It actually looks a lot better and works a lot better on old computers. Like I use Slackware on some 10-year-old computers with KDE, and I also do the same thing with CentOS, and it works perfectly fine. So that's pretty good. So now, for those of you who are like developers out there, say maybe none of these are good for you, and you want to build your own Linux distribution completely from scratch, but you don't want to maintain it and release the updates and everything. You just want something that you can put together yourself, but is like, the updates and everything are provided for you. In that case, Arch Linux. You can do that. Arch Linux has a command line installer. It comes with no desktop environment. It is literally the Linux kernel and Pac-Man. And no, Pac-Man is not the game Pac-Man. Pac-Man stands for Package Manager. So, Arch Linux Package Manager is Pac-Man. So, yeah, just make sure you're aware of that. It doesn't actually come with the game Pac-Man. So, there's an... Yeah, it's a command line operating system. It comes with nothing but the Linux kernel. But you can, however, this gives you the option to install different packages you want and to install which desktop environment you want. Just because it comes with no desktop environment doesn't mean you can't install one. So you can easily install a desktop environment of your choice. KDE, XFCE, LXDE, Mate, GNOME, Cinnamon, whatever. So you can install any desktop environment you want with Arch Linux. And there's also an Arch Linux distribution. There are tons of Arch Linux-based distributions, but there's one called Manjaro that's also a pretty good one. So, yeah, you can try that out. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please make sure to hit that subscribe and notification button down below so that you don't miss out on any of our future videos. And I hope you had luck with this video, and we'll see you next time.